Hello everyone! Today I am going to be reviewing the long-awaited sophomore album by Australian pop artist Troye Sivan. I have been talking about this artist recently in his new singles that he's been releasing, which he released quite a few considering this album is only 10 songs in its standard edition. He released almost more than half of it leading up to the album release this last Friday, August 31st, 2018. Which I wasn't entirely crazy about. When an album is so small, it does seem like you're putting a little too many cards out in front when you're, releasing so many singles ahead of time. We had My, and The Good Side back in January, way back when. And then we had Bloom in June, and then Dance to This in June. And then he also released recently the song Animal in August. So we'd already heard half the album by the time it was to be released, which is always not something I'm crazy about. However, it definitely got me excited for this record. Troye Sivan is an artist who I am recently getting into, and I will confess I have still not heard all of his album, Blue Neighborhood. I know that I said a while ago that I was going to review it, and I had hoped I would probably have done it before this album came out. But there's just so much music to review and time just gets away from you. So unfortunately, I still have yet to review it. I definitely will at some point because Troy is definitely an artist that I bookmarked as someone I wanted to come back to and go back into his discography. But Bloom is the first record I'm going to be reviewing on his channel of his music, and it's just the way it is. And Bloom is a great album to be introduced to Troy from because it is a very well and highly critically acclaimed album. I've already talked about half the songs on this record practically because I talked about My, and The Good Side when they were released, and I talked about how My felt a little bit generic for me. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a song that it grabs your attention because it is this confident, sensual, engrossing track that is very well produced. But there were some, maybe just the fact the melody was a bit repetitive. I felt like there were some cop-outs in that department. So I wasn't exactly in love with the melody of the chorus. I felt like it built up in the verses to be something a lot more than it ended up being in the full scope of that song. So My is not an absolute favorite track of mine from this record, though it definitely has its place, and it definitely has grown just a smidge over time, so it's definitely not a skippable track, and it's definitely not a song that weighs this album down by any means. I mean, the nice thing about having such a short album is you really don't get any filler tracks, and that's definitely the case for this record. The other track, The Good Side, I know I'm not really talking about these songs in order, but it's just such a short album, and I'm kind of just going through it that way. The Good Side was a song I fell in love with upon first listen, just because of how mournful and reflective the acoustic element of having the guitar and him just softly singing about a love that had to fall apart. And I talk about, I analyze just in the lyrics how raw and vulnerable he portrays himself. And that is something that comes across so beautifully on this record and is probably one of the highlights for me. It's just the raw and bold lyricism that is, of course, obviously not afraid to talk about same-sex relationship, which is something that I think his previous music strayed away from to some extent. He was obviously singing about relationships, but he wasn't using the he pronouns as overtly. And I like seeing, in this day and age, queer artists being more comfortable to use those pronouns and not be so, same with artists like Sam Smith and Adam Lambert. They used to have to kind of hide it into just vagueness, and now it's a lot more open, so I really appreciate that. This album is very open and very personal, and The Good Side is reflecting on the fact that you actually probably got the longer straw. The person you were with probably wasn't treated as well as they should have been, and you're actually kind of, not like you're berating yourself afterwards, but you're reflecting on it and saying to this person, I am sorry, I didn't realize that I was kind of stringing you along, that I was getting more from you than I was giving you back. And that's a really important thing for people to realize, especially as a relationship is coming to a close. If you want to rectify anything, to kind of really let the other person know that you feel sincerely sorry for, possibly stringing them along or for not being completely honest with them or being completely open with them. Because some people will just they'll just let themselves, unfortunately, kind of get strung along, and they need a little bit more transparency because they're not going to know any better. And it's really wise, but it's also really hard to come to the realization that you were kind of the one who was in the wrong the whole time. This is how I'm interpreting this beautiful track. Some very psychedelic, production. This album was produced predominantly by these producers, Oscar Gores. There were two Oscars, Oscar Holter, Ariel Richtscheid, and Bram Inscore. And then he also collaborated writing-wise with American musicians Leland and Ali X. I think it's really sweet that Sivan wrote, acknowledged that this song, The Good Side, meant the world to the person he was singing about, the relationship that fell apart years ago. And to kind of, his interpretation, which is a bit different from mine, but it's basically coming from the idea of the breakup being so much better for one party than the other. And in Troy's position of, fame and privilege, and the fact that he can write songs therapeutically about it and go on tour and receive so much love immediately after such a traumatic event, is something that the other person wasn't able to receive. And so the privilege that comes with being a famous musician or a famous person going through breakups, we always think that like it's always difficult because you're always under a microscope, and your relationship falls apart, people tend to blame you for it, or it's a really difficult position to be in. But at the same time, you have so many people around the world who love you and support you, and that other party doesn't have that. It's a much more lonely kind of experience after a breakup for that other person, and he didn't realize that at the time, so he's trying to rectify that. It's a beautiful song, and it's one of the highlight tracks on this record for me. Now, the title track, Bloom, is, as we all know, a bop about bottoming, and it is a beautiful, almost transcendental kind of pop song, because it's somewhat generic in terms of production and in terms of maybe the chorus and the catchy hook. I heard some people say it sounds very boy band. I will say this, there are times where Troy's vocals sound very similar to Justin Bieber's. And I mean, it's just a coincidence, but it definitely comes across that way, just in the way he has that sort of mellowed vocal that is very, melodic, and definitely Troy has an amazing voice. And I'm not saying Justin doesn't. Obviously, that means Justin also has an amazing voice. But there are moments where I'm like, is this a Justin Bieber song? But then you kind of look at the lyrics and the offbeat production, and you're like, Justin would never do something as dark and twisted as this, or as intricate as this. Because this album is, Bloom is a little bit more, overt and extroverted. But this album is very introverted and introspective and very mellow. And that's something that carries across cohesively for this record beautifully, and I love that about it. I think Bloom's music video eclipses the song to some extent just because of how fabulous it is. You can't help but picture the music video scenes and him dressed in these beautiful dresses and fabulous scarves and makeup and full kind of femme beauty, which is something I love that he is embracing on this record. I kind of have to give the shout out to supporting, feminine boys. This is a big tribute to the softer, kind of more demure, kind of elegant, graceful side of gay culture, which, don't get me wrong, is definitely there and is definitely promoted. But a lot of the times it gets sort of eclipsed into drag culture, which drag culture is great, but it's its own thing. And I feel like we don't often spend a lot of time focusing so much on just separating femininity and masculinity from drag culture. Troy's not trying to be a drag queen when he dresses up as a woman. He's not trying to be this over-the-top materialistic persona. And this is just an expression of his true nature. And I feel, of course, we have so many male artists who tend to want to kind of hide that part of themselves and present themselves as more masculine. Though that's starting to change. We've got a lot more artists like Sam Smith really trying to break down those gender barriers and wear high heels and wear lipstick and, have more fun, similar to what great artists like, Freddie Mercury and David Bowie used to do in the past. So we definitely see a much more liberated Troy in so much of the songwriting and also in the presentation of songs like Bloom. So it's an incredible song, and I definitely don't find its generic, traditional kind of composition to be a downside for it, because it's catchy and it definitely it picks up the energy in parts where we need it to be, just like My does. Because the other song, Dance to This, which was released in June, was a song that definitely was not what we expected. I mean, it's called Dance to This, and it's featuring Ariana Grande, so you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a huge pop moment, right? Well, it turns out it's not quite what we expected. It's actually one of the most mellow pop synth-laden tracks that you can imagine. And at first, it really didn't rub me the right way. I was not necessarily feeling this track. when it first came out in June. It took me about a month or so to warm up to it after I came back to it. And I was like, there's something about the instrumental and also the way their hushed vocals kind of harmonize that actually is kind of beautiful. And I think once the music video came out, I kind of got the song more. The song is actually kind of more subversive than you would think. It's speaking to people who are not necessarily tuned into what's going on in the mainstream. So, a song that might be everyone's dancing to on the radio, and they don't really get it, or at least this is how I'm interpreting it. And so they're dancing to their own drum, they're dancing to their own sound or their own music. And the music video shows that, Troy's in front of all these people in what looks like a correction facility or some sort of night school or detention. I don't know. It looks like detention for adults or something. And he starts performing, and no one's interested. They're just saying, "What's this boy doing? This music's terrible. Get him off the stage." And he's just having the time of his life. And then Ariana comes and joins him and is like, "Hey, I get it." And there's this sort of resonance there. And so they kind of perform to this empty audience of people who couldn't care less. And so that's the sentiment is actually quite, I think, quite ingenious. And the song actually does kind of do that for you, because immediately you're thinking, oh, this is not what I was expecting. This isn't quite like a traditional bop. This is like a more mellowed, vibed out track. And it definitely takes its time to grow on you. And then it becomes its own kind of infectious song. And it needs that space and that levity to sort of overcome you. So I definitely find this track to overall be a experimental, interesting synth kind of dark wave track. It's very depressing. It's a downer song, but it's about dancing. And then it kind of loses itself, I think, a little bit in the bridge when he starts to sing really fast, and then it starts to try and get some sort of beat and rhythm going. That sort of makes it a little bit conflated, because I don't think the song is necessarily wanting to pick up that kind of speed, and it's sort of all of the sudden then halted in the middle of the bridge, and all of a sudden it's very spaced out and synthy again, and it's what just happened? Why did we speed up all of a sudden for just a few bars and then drop back down? I don't really vibe with that. So that's the one thing that I necessarily love about this song. But of course, Ariana is a beautiful match for Troy's vocals. They both have that silky kind of honey-like voice that's just, it's refined, and it's beautiful to listen to. Okay, so then let's go through the rest of the track list now, because I've talked about all the songs I've already kind of talked about. 17, this is one of my favorite songs on this record. The opening track, very ecstatic and exuberant. With that melancholic tinge in the backing vocals that kind of carry through the melody line. This song is about experimenting on Grindr when you're 17, which 17 is a bit of a, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about 17-year-olds using Grindr. I don't necessarily think that is, I'm almost, yeah, whether it was him as he was slightly older using it and meeting a 17-year-old, or vice versa, he was 17, which I think is what this song is talking about. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, 17 is a bit young to be, I know you want to be old at that age. You feel like you're old enough, but you're technically underage. So, I mean, Grindr is supposed to be an 18+ app. So anyway, but of course, singing about something like that is an online dating and hookup culture is something I expected on this record. An honest record about gay culture in 2018. And even though this is reflecting on one of his first experiences, I feel like for me, this song should be called 23, because for me, it wasn't until I was 23 years old that I had this kind of experience. When I was 17, well, first of all, Grindr wasn't around, but also, yeah, it was not on my radar at that point. I knew I was gay by 17, but I was not in any way, shape, or form looking to actually date. And if I was dating, it was definitely not with strangers online. That would have been way too scary for me at that age. I got these beliefs that I think you want to break. Got something here to lose that I think you want to take from me. You say that I'm asleep, but I want to be awake. And he said, age is just a number, just like any other. We can do whatever you want. Well, yes, age is just a number, unless you're 17 and you're chatting with someone who's 25. Age is legally a definite number in that case. Boy becomes a man now, can't tell a man to slow down. He'll just do whatever he wants. I mean, yes, this is a coming of age tale. We get that. I went out looking for love when I was 17, maybe a little too young, but it was real to me. And in the heat of the night, saw things I'd never seen. Heard the whispers, now let's see what all the talk's about, and taking in the sights and measuring the sounds. Measuring the sounds, interesting. So maybe it was a little too young, at least he admits that. Obviously, he was lying about his age. He says he's not looking back at these experiences in a negative way or a positive way. It's simply a thing that happened, that was experience that he grew from and learned a lot from, which is definitely a wise way to look at it. You know, I know there's tons of people who do lie about their age on these apps, and he talks about these hypersexualized environments and being introduced to that. The trepidation and all of the excitement, exhilaration, it's all there in the sound and the way he delivers this song. So it really takes you on that journey, and it sounds beautiful. I would say that the production is obviously very psychedelic, but I would say there's a lot of 80s synth inspired kind of elements to this album. It reminds me a lot of Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion album that came out 3 years ago. That one was actually also very critically well acclaimed, and I feel like there's some similarities, not in just terms of lyrical content being very open and honest and direct, but also in terms of the fact that the sound is kind of coming from the same 80s inspired area, just like Taylor Swift has done, just like tons of artists honestly have been doing for a while now. It's, you know, very popular to use those 80s synths. There's another song that comes on later in the album, What a Heavenly Way to Die, that definitely sounds like it's trying to use that kind of synth work. So the next track, Postcard, is a beautiful duet with this artist named Gordi. Now, I thought Gordi was a female artist, but I'm not entirely sure if she's cis female. So her name is Sophie. She's Australian from Sydney. However, her vocals, or his vocals, are very auto-tuned, and at first I was a little bit like, oh, that sounds like a deeper voice than I was expecting. Gordi doesn't have a whole lot of time on this track, and I was kind of hoping to see a little bit more of that duet come through, but it's Troy's heart-wrenching lyrics are so beautiful and honest, and it has a melody that just washes over you, I think. You know, it's not grandiose. It's not like when you're thinking of just like a piano ballad, it's not that like traditional kind of piano ballad. Like it's very clumsy in parts, like with the chords. Like he's not trying to make it picture perfect. And I love that about the delivery and about the way he, you know, delivers on the timing. He drops the F word a lot in this song, but I actually think it works and it doesn't feel grating because it's expressing this sort of sentiment of like things kind of just suddenly just kind of like a train just halted on the tracks. I sent you a postcard and I never heard back from you. I think that's the sentiment that sort of inspired this whole track. You know, it's this sort of almost traditional ghosting story, which we all know and hate so much. And we all need anthems to get us through those dark, lonely nights for. And that's definitely what this song is. And it's memorable. It's a beautiful snapshot of an emotion from that period. And definitely, again, a highlight track for this record. Plum. Now, this was a song I saw the title for, and I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of exciting for a title. I was expecting a bit more of an upbeat track, similar to Bloom, just because when you have a title like Plum, and it's probably going to be very, I don't want to say erotic, but the metaphors will be there. It's actually, you know, not so much about a sexual relationship as I thought. It's more about just a relationship in general and how relationships can go out of season and a sweet thing can turn bad and nothing lasts forever. So instead of Plum being something else, which you can probably guess where I was going with that in my head, this song is actually just that, using that metaphor like a bitter tangerine, like sirens in the streets, to sort of signify something actually quite negative, about a plum going bad and a piece of fruit that, again, you can't leave it sitting out forever. Now, of course, in terms of relationships, it doesn't always happen that the relationship sours over time, but it is very possible. There's a chill in the air and a sinking feeling. Maybe our time has come. Maybe we've overgrown. Even the sweetest plum has only got so long. Now, of course, this is a very jaunty and very carefree sounding song in production as he sings it. I mean, the electronic instrumental is just like very bouncy. It's very much what I was expecting in terms of the sonics, but he's singing something that's quite mournful and reflective on top of it. again, nothing wrong with that sort of conflating juxtaposition. I think it encapsulates these feelings that we all have when we're young and we're dealing with all these hormones and all this unsureness and anxiety about things. It's like, it's so exciting and then it's so down the next. And I think that this song actually fits that sonically. Instead, I'm just wasting my time pressing rewind. Oh, yeah, so easy to just forget about the problems in the current moment and just reminisce on the past and get high off of that. To all the nights we shared, the ripest peach or pear, but changes in the air. Not my absolute favorite song on this record, but still a highlight. So what a heavenly way to die. I mentioned the 80s synth work. This is a very sparse track. I have to be completely honest. If there was one song that I absolutely had to choose to skip on this record, just in terms of the sonics, it would be this song. I've heard some people rave about it. I just don't really find that much to come back to with it. Like, it's not catchy, and it sounds a little similar to, like, other songs in the album, and that's where maybe the cohesion part maybe makes the album start to sound a little bit just the same, in this one instance. But if we're talking about lyrics, it's a whole other story. The idea of dying with someone, of spending the rest of your life with someone that you truly want. When our prime has come and gone and our youth is all but melted, we can listen to this song so we don't have to accept it, just as long as you'll be home in the one we've manifested, in the life we've built together. The idea of, if you still love me when we're no longer young and beautiful in the same way, then we've made it, and it's the best way to go out of this life. And I so agree with that sentiment. And it has this iconic, beautiful Tumblr line, because forever is in your eyes, but forever ain't half the time I want to spend with you. So, you know, cue the Nicholas Sparks movie. This is that kind of beautiful teen romance, or not teen, but just innocent romance is such a endearing quality that we'll always sing about to the end of time, and this song is illuminating that. I just, like I said, I wish melody-wise, maybe it was, I don't know. I'm such a melody person, and I feel like the song just kind of flatlines a little bit for me, but it's just me, just my opinion. So, Lucky Strike, again, a much more electric song, very 80s sounding, very upbeat, and it's very bubblegum, and I like that. You know, I was expecting that bubblegum aspect to some of these songs. The song Animal is a moment on this record where things get really esoteric and aired out. And I think that Animal is a beautiful closing to this record because of how lush in sound this song is, and how, I mean, you know, it's like Animal. It feels primal. It feels like prime emotion just being wrenched out of someone. There's these beautiful guitar instrumentals that sort of float through the sonic framework, and it just tugs at the heartstrings. I told you something safe, something I've never said before, and I can't keep my hands off you. While you're lying awake, covered all in the night before, I love that lyric. I'm high, no one's got me quite like you. I want you all to myself, don't leave none for nobody else. I am an animal with you. No angels could beckon me back, and it's hotter than hell where I'm at. An ode to the boy I love, I'll die to care for you. And as the days fly by, we'll be more than getting through. And in time, we'll build a home for two. He describes this as a 5-minute 80s stadium love song. It's a longer track, it's like 5 minutes, and it really breaks down into some, like I said, very kind of 80s hearkening psychedelia, which the electronic elements that are there, you know, it's interesting. They're never like propulsive, or they're never grinding. It's just soft and mellow churning underneath, like tectonic plates. There's this feeling of under the surface, all of these moving emotions. And the microbeats that come through on some of these songs and the layering, it's very exquisitely produced. And Animal, although I think there are elements for the song, like I feel like it does trail off a little bit. Like, I don't know if the song justifies itself being 5 minutes long, because it does. In like songs like The Good Side, it gets very experimental and trippy as it fades out at the end. I love that. Whereas this song, I feel like could have used a similar approach, but also a bit more of a refrain. I don't know. There's something that song feels like it trails off a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome too long. I'm nitpicking here. This is a great album. Like I said, raw, honest, prime, and yet very mellow. You know, it's not hitting you over the head with stuff. But yet the lyrics are pretty direct, you know? I mean, there's not a whole lot of nuanced metaphors, but where there are some, it's well placed, and it's easy to kind of understand what he's singing about. So I definitely think for, a pop album that is going into that kind of bubblegum territory, this rises above to being something that an alternative artist would release or an independent artist would release. And that's Troy's music. And I think that, he's not this traditional pop star, and I love that about him. He's murkier, and he has, elements of bubblegum. He has elements of playful pop, but he has so much more to him than that. And this album really showcases that. And also, he's not afraid to get sensual. He's not afraid to talk about things. He's grown up. He can really bring all of these threads together and be a much more kind of like exalted queer identity now. And I feel like he really can feel that, and you feel that liberation through the music. Whereas I don't know, maybe his earlier music, again, I've only heard a few songs. Maybe it felt like it was. I mean, I know it was very sad. Like he liked to make very sad, depressing songs. And I know in this album he wanted to make upbeat stuff for a change, which was difficult for him. And I think he pulled that through. But like I said, he mixes the happy and the sad beautifully. But I definitely can sense he's not hiding as much anymore. And I think in blending the two kind of elements of the sadness of his music with the happy elements, he's finding a really, really powerful emotional resonance there that we all can relate to. So you can dance away the emotions. And it's not perfect, but it is definitely a standout record for him, and it's very cohesive, very well produced. So I definitely give it high marks. My favorite tracks being The Good Side, 17, Postcard, and Bloom. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please give a like and subscribe if you did. And if you want to check out my other, like, more in-depth analysis of Troy's singles from throughout 2018, I'll link them in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. Love you. Bye.